Turn with me to John chapter 4 this morning. That's where we will be, and we're actually just going to start there and go right into things. We're beginning a new series here at New Heights called One Small Step. I told you at the very beginning of the year that a lot of the focus this year, and we're going to come back with many series talking about this concept of evangelism, which is sort of a scary word for a lot of people. It's kind of a bad word. It's like the word that we don't say and talk about. But it has a very simple meaning to it. It just means that we have good news and we want to share the good news. That's all the word evangelism ever means. That's all it means in the Greek word, spreading the good news. And so this series is built around the entire concept of evangelism. What does it mean to evangelize in our lives? And again, I know that we may understand that idea, and we've probably certainly heard that word in some form or fashion along the way. But really, and this is for me personally, maybe it's not for you, maybe you're really good at this, but sometimes it's very hard to apply it. It's very difficult to live it out in life and what that means to evangelize. And I think something that we often do when we talk about evangelism is that we turn evangelism into a process. That all it takes is to have the right tips, all that it takes is to have the right techniques, and tricks, and that we can be great evangelizers. So my pitch is not this: over the next 4 weeks, I'm going to teach you all the things that you need to know, and by the end, you will be the best evangelizer the world has ever seen. No, it's not going to be that. I hope that you are a fantastic evangelizer. I hope you are a fantastic good news spreader in your life. But it doesn't take gimmicks and sales pitches and techniques to be able to do it. It doesn't take a bait and switch. We have a great story. We have a great Savior that we rest on, and we just kind of leave it at that. We present people. I was talking in Sunday school this morning, and I thought, this is a question that has kind of boggled me for a while, and I was just going across the story of Jesus calling Matthew, the tax collector, to be one of his disciples. And I thought to myself, why in the world, not just with Matthew, but in any situation, would people look at Jesus, and he comes and calls Matthew, says, "Come follow me," and Matthew goes, "Okay," and follows him. And I think to myself, I have a hard enough time getting my kids to listen to and follow my directions. How in the world did Jesus just come up to a guy who had everything, who was a tax collector, was wealthy beyond his wildest dreams? Jesus says, "Come follow me," and leave everything behind is what he's really saying. And Matthew goes, "Okay." And I think it's because in the depth of every single person on this planet, we have something about our lives that we just say, something's not right. There's something about my life that I just do not like. And Jesus had a way of touching people at that deepest point in their life and saying, "I can fix that. I can make your life more than that." And that's what he does every time that he goes out to spread the news. Jesus came and he says, "I have come to preach the message. The kingdom is near. The kingdom has come." Jesus was seriously, if we want to learn how to do evangelism, just go to Jesus every single time. He's got numerous stories throughout the Gospels of how in the world you do it. And one of the best places that I feel and that I think is in John chapter 4, a very familiar story about the woman at the well. And so I just want to read, and this is a very extended section, and I just want to pull out some chunks and some parts that I want to highlight this morning about how we do evangelism better. And it really is all centered around this one phrase. It's the whole title of this series, that we do it with one small step. Not huge, giant leaps. Luke was telling me before, he goes, maybe you should call this series One Small Seed. I'm like, that's a good one too. Jesus uses that metaphor and that image a lot, doesn't he, of spreading seeds, all right? That we're all just spreading seeds. We just have to make sure we know where we need to kind of sow those seeds. That all it takes is just one little seed there and a handful of seeds there, and something grows out of it. But John chapter 4, I'm going to start at verse 1. And like I said, I'm going to try to help you as I jump along here because we're not going to read every last part of it. We're going to read a lot of it. But it starts, and it says this in John 4, verse 1. Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John, though Jesus himself didn't baptize, his disciples did. And so he left Judea and he returned to Galilee. So he had to go from a southern point and he was going to a northern point. We're going to talk about that here in just a bit. And it says in verse 4, and this is a really interesting statement to me, he had to go through Samaria. Now we could look at that from a purely geographical standpoint. We could say, well, obviously, if you would look at the map, and then to make it really easy, Judea is here, Galilee is up there. He would just have to go through this region of Samaria to get to Galilee. I think there's a little bit more to it. I think there's something deeper under it when it says that he had to go through Samaria. I think there is a divine appointment that's awaiting him in Samaria, specifically the town of Sychar that we're going to talk about here along the way. It says eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Now soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink," which is a really large statement. You would think like that's a pretty simple phrase, but him doing that was a really big deal. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. And she said to Jesus, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" And then Jesus says this large phrase in verse 10. Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you personally, and the world. And if you knew who was speaking to you, you would ask me and I would give you living water." I want to jump to verse 13. Jesus continues on saying, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. Anyone who drinks water from this well will be thirsty. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." And then I want to jump all the way over to verse 27. I know I'm kind of doing a lot of jumping around here. I encourage you to go back and read all of John 4 and what happens in the story. Basically, they have an interchange here. This Jesus and this woman talk back and forth, and they're going. And Jesus, what he's doing all the time here is he's driving just a little bit deeper, inch by inch. A little by little, one small step at a time, one little seed here, one little seed there in this conversation with this woman. And then it says in verse 27, the disciples came back and they were shocked to find Jesus talking with a woman, but none of them had the nerve to ask, "What do you want with her?" Or, "Why are you talking to her?" The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" And then listen to the response. This is like the response that you want when you tell the gospel. It says here that the people from the town came streaming out to see Jesus. And call it what you will in this situation. I don't think we ever really see this story completely for what it is. Call it worlds colliding, cultures clashing, being worlds apart. I watched when I grew up Sesame Street, and there was a segment on Sesame Street that was always called this: "One of these things is not like the other." And then what's the other phrase? "One of these things just doesn't belong." I have some pictures up here this morning of things that just do not belong. If you could see the very top picture here, do you notice these little boys? And do you notice one of the little boys just doesn't quite fit in? Poor him. I mean, what a tragedy. He shows up and all his friends are in Batman costumes, and guess what he is? He's just Robin for the day. That's what he is. See the picture at the bottom right there? I'm assuming, are these penguins? I really am not a connoisseur of birds. I guess they're some sort of a bird, but you see all of them are kind of grayish or brownish, and you got this poor little guy right here that's sticking out. I guess he's not poor, he's looking pretty good. He's got his best suit on, all right? He's wearing his blue. He's got his yellows popping, all right? How about the next one? I thought this was a really cute picture. Do you see it? This whole flock of sheep, and then right in the middle of it is this big fluffy dog. I love that one right there. Guys, there's a whole lot going on here in John 4, and you look at it from the surface and you say, something just doesn't belong in this picture. We've got Jesus and we've got this woman, and they just don't go together. I also found this picture, if it's the next one there, Doug. This was from the last Olympics, and it really kind of, to me, talks and it speaks to what our world is today. At any given time, you see on the left-hand side is, I assume, I'm not going to try to assume too much here, but a lady who is probably from some Middle Eastern country. And then on the other side, you have some woman who is pretty scantily clad playing volleyball. It's just like these things don't belong together. There's a world of cultural differences that are happening in this story. And if we're really honest with ourselves, something that we really miss is we have cultural differences that exist right here in our tiny little community of Connersville. Bump up against people every single day that may look like us and may act like us, but we are really sometimes worlds apart. But no matter what differences exist between all of us, one thing that all of us have in common is this: we are all very broken by sin. We all live in a world that is stained by sin. And in a large sense, our text for this morning that we just read, or at least part of John 4 that we read, is an answer to that age-old problem. In this encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman, for the very first time in John's gospel, the salvation of God, the gospel of God is going out beyond the borders of Israel. It's going to all of the world. And if we had a chance and we had some time, what I would want to do is look back actually at John chapter 3, because there's a story that happens there that pairs very well with John chapter 4. In chapter 3 of John, we get a front row seat to a conversation between Jesus and a Jewish religious leader named Nicodemus. And do you know what the message Jesus had for Nicodemus? I'm just going to sum it up, all right? We don't need to read the entire chapter. The story is this. He comes to this guy and he says this. Jesus says to Nicodemus, "You need fixing, buddy," is what he says. I guess in slightly more theological language, Jesus says to Nicodemus, "You need a Savior." Now, this is a guy who was a religious elite in Jerusalem. I mean, this guy is a Pharisee, and he comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, "Guess what? You may think you have it together, but you don't have it together. You're broken, and you need me. You need to be born again," is actually what he says to Nicodemus. And in the very next chapter, what we just read here in chapter 4, and on the heels of that conversation comes this encounter we read between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. And do you know what Jesus' message is to the Samaritan woman? You need Jesus. It is the very same message that he gives to the religiously elite that he gives to this broken and this polluted woman. You need Jesus. Guys, I cannot be any clearer than this morning as we start this sermon in this series. Everyone, everywhere needs Jesus. Everyone, everywhere, not only needs Jesus, but they deserve the opportunity to hear the life-saving gospel of Jesus Christ. And again, that doesn't mean that we need to go a world away. If you choose to do that, that's great and wonderful. But guess what? We have people, and this is mind-boggling to some people, that we have people right here in Connersville and the surrounding area that don't really know the gospel of Jesus Christ. We don't have to go worlds away. We can be right here. And what we really have illustrated in John chapter 3 and John chapter 4 are two different people from two very different cultures and the ways of life, and we have one common need between them. They need to hear the very same message, the need to become new in Jesus Christ, the need to be made new through Jesus Christ. And really, when we look at John 4, Jesus and this woman are worlds apart. But Jesus has a way of bridging a gap. He has a way of bridging a gulf between the two of them with one very small act. And I want to go back to it, and I want to look at it here in just a minute. I don't want you to miss it because it's so very important. One small act, one small question, actually, that he asks. And all it took for Jesus to transform this lady's life and an entire town's life was one small step. Probably remember, many of you were probably alive and you remember the Apollo 11 mission, right? I mean, it was probably one of the greatest moments in all of American history. The moment that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and the astronauts land on the moon, right? And the most famous, iconic line in all of American history is when Neil Armstrong says what? It says, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Actually, he was misquoted on that. The transmission actually didn't come through correctly, because if you really took it at face value for what he said and what you hear on recordings, the phrase makes no sense at all. What he really says is, this is one small step for mankind and one giant leap for mankind, is what it actually says. But what he actually said was, this is one small step for a man. This is one giant leap for mankind. But what we have here in John chapter 4, and this whole concept of evangelism that we're going to talk about, is a pretty huge, huge moment. Giant leap for all of mankind, for all of eternity. One small step. Jesus comes to this woman in a very personal way. I mean, he completely goes out of his way, not literally. It was actually the shortest most direct route to get to Galilee from where he was in Jerusalem. But you see, what usually happened with Jews is they did not want to go through Samaria because they hated Samaritans so much. So what they would really do, and this is the best way that I have to kind of illustrate this, is they would either on their map, they would go over to the east and across the Jordan and over into that area and then come back over into Galilee, or they would go over to the coast and they would follow up the coast and then end up in Galilee instead of going the straight direct route. This would almost be like us going back into Connersville and you're like, I really don't like to go like 3rd Street. I don't like to do that. And so I'm going to turn right at Gray Road and go all the way out there and go around to get back into Connersville. Or I'm going to head out and go north on Gray Road and go all the way out in the country just so I can go back to Connersville. It really makes no sense, does it, right? You're like, it's not a very direct route. That is how much Jews hated Samaritans. I don't care if it takes me extra days, it takes me extra hours, it takes me extra time. But Jesus goes out of his way for this woman. He deviates from the norm and his task at hand. He wanted to get to Galilee. That's really what his whole point was. He wanted to get out of Judea, out of Jerusalem, away from the Pharisees and get to Galilee. And he has to go through Samaria. He goes out of the spotlight for this one woman. And he does it so that he can show her greatest need. Jesus left the crowds. He left the religious center of all things to rescue a needy woman who was on the edges of society, who was an outcast, as the religious elite would have categorized it. But we look at this and I ask myself, and we ask ourselves, should this attitude and behavior that Jesus shows surprise us at all? Should his compassion for the lost really surprise us at all? John chapter 10, what does Jesus say about this concept of bringing people into the fold and having compassion and going for the lost? And Jesus says in John 10, verses 14 through 16, I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me. Just as my Father knows me, I know the Father, and so I sacrifice my life for the sheep. What's he saying there? I will go to any length to make sure that I rescue those who are lost. I have other sheep too that are not in the sheepfold. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd. What does he say? Matthew chapter 18, verses 12 through 14, he talks about what is probably one of the most famous parables about this whole concept. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others on the hills and go out and search for the one that is lost? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he will rejoice over it more than the other 99 who were not lost and who did not wander away. In the same way, it is not my heavenly Father's will that even one of these little ones should perish. Jesus has a knack, he has a compassion, he has a love, he has a desire to seek out people who don't know Jesus, to know him, those who are lost. As one author says it in a commentary that I was reading out of this week, and he was talking about the concept of evangelism, of being good news spreaders. He says, we often act as if the gospel can best be shared through big programs, through big events. We think it can be large scale, it can be automated, it can be an impersonal process, complete with gimmicks and tricks and slick techniques. But listen to this, and this is so the truth. God always, always, always works personally. He always sends out individual people to tell them about Jesus. This one idea forms the basis for this entire series that we're beginning this morning. The gospel is not shared most effectively through clever methods and marketing and strategies, but through simple acts of love and faithfulness, one word, one conversation, one small step at a time. And I look at the story in John chapter 4 and I think to myself, Jesus had every single reason not to talk with this woman. He could have gone a different route. He could have chosen to just stay silent when he's sitting there at the well next to this woman. But he bucks social convention. He bucks customs and norms because at a deeper level, he understood her heart condition and he had deep compassion and care and concern for her. And here's the kicker of the whole story. I think what happens is Jesus understands this woman's broken condition, and she doesn't. She has no idea her lostness, her brokenness, the sin in her life and how that is affecting her. Guys, don't miss this. This is so very important at this beginning part of this story. The starting place for evangelism is having a concern for others and a recognition that they don't have something that they need, Jesus Christ himself. And here's what I'm convinced of. Until our hearts become broken for people who don't know Jesus, we can't expect our telling, no matter how good news we have, how much good news we have, how good the news is we have, it won't make much of a difference in the world. That news won't be all that great to the other people around us. Guys, our evangelism needs to be motivated by Jesus' love for us and our love for others. People will never know how much you're going to love them unless they know that you like them. We could say all day long that, well, I love that person, or I love people, and I love... There's a difference, and I think you know this. There's a difference between loving something and loving someone and liking them. And we could say all day long and pay lip service to us that we love to go after people who don't know Jesus. But do we really like people? Do we really want to engage with people that are far from Christ? So in this one act of stepping out, of reaching into this woman's world to turn his compassion into action, Jesus begins the process of completely changing not only the course of her day. I mean, imagine this woman. She was a woman who came to this well every single day, probably the same time, did the very same thing, got some water and took it back. And in this moment right here, her day is completely different. When this man talks to her, not only is her day different, Jesus completely changes the course of her whole life. And I don't want you to miss the simplicity of this situation. Again, I don't want us to foul it up and add more to it than there really is. I don't want to reduce down evangelism to it's just really simple. It's these steps right here. That's all you have to do. But Jesus really honestly does it with one single question. Verse 7, I want you to look back here at verse 7, what Jesus does. It really seems like an innocent and nonchalant kind of question. It says, soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, please give me a drink. That's it. That's where everything starts in this story, is Jesus asking this one simple question. But I'm convinced the question that he asked is actually very intentional, and it led to the extended conversation that we have in all of John 4. One word, one phrase, one conversation is sometimes all it takes to completely change the course of somebody's life. It doesn't always work like that, but a lot of times it does. It just plants out one little seed that you'll be able to come back to later. There's something else that this one question signifies, and it's the first truth that I want to highlight this morning if you're taking notes and want to write this down, or actually I think it's already down there in your bulletin. There are some things that telling the good news requires. There are some things that faithful evangelism requires, and the first one of those that we see in Jesus is that faithful, or what I call Jesus-style evangelism, requires boldness. There's just no other way to put it, guys. There's nothing that I find that's more intimidating than walking up and talking to someone that you don't know. And Jesus does that in this scenario. He walks up to a woman he's never met before in his life, he's never seen before in his life, and he asks her this question. And he gets into this long conversation with her. Guys, taking the first step, saying the first word is often the hardest, and it requires the greatest amount of courage in our lives. And I don't want us to fool ourselves here. Jesus was taking a great risk in this situation. The reaction from the disciples in verse 27 that we read tells everything about the risk that Jesus was taking. Verse 27 again says the disciples come back from town, and they were shocked to find Jesus talking to a woman. They wanted to ask, but they didn't ask, what do you want with this woman? Why in the world are you talking to this woman? You see, common Jewish thought in the day of Jesus was such that they thought this. Not only should men not talk to women, certainly not a rabbi like Jesus should be talking to a woman. In fact, in the Talmud, which was actually just a collection of Jewish civil laws and religious thoughts, it said this: for a rabbi, and this is so harsh, for a rabbi to talk too much to a woman, even his own wife, was at best, I would not recommend, guys, you ever use this phrase with your wife, was at best a waste of time, and was at worst a distraction from the study of God's Word, and potentially a great evil that could lead to hell. That's what people thought in Jesus' day about women. You don't think that Jesus was taking a massive, deep risk when he started to talk to this woman? I mean, the questions that would go through my mind and the questions that were going through the disciples' mind were this. What in the world is it going to look like? Jesus is talking to this woman. What are people going to think? How might this be detrimental to Jesus' ministry that he's just getting off the ground? But Jesus does not seem to be given to those concerns. He doesn't seem to be given to the conventions and the religious norms of his time. Instead, he busts right through all those barriers. He busts through the what-ifs. And he busts through the shouldn't-dos. And why does he show such boldness? Guys, I think it's the very same boldness that we had to have in our lives as well. Why does he show this boldness? For one reason only that I think. Jesus is radically convinced that what he has is what this woman needs. Guys, how's that for a really novel idea? What would happen if we became so convinced that what we had in our faith was so compelling, was so fulfilling, that we had to share it with others? We couldn't be stopped in sharing it with other people. And do you know, our boldness has a direct correlation to the confidence that you have in the one who sent you. Question I would ask you, and I would ask myself, I ask anybody, is do you really believe the message? Do you really pick up these words of Jesus and you read what he does in his ministry, he does in the gospel? Do you really believe that message? Do you really believe the messenger? Guys, we're only ever as bold as we are strong and secure in who we are in Christ and who we believe Christ to be. If you really and truly don't believe who Christ is, who he says he is, or who he reveals himself to be, it's going to be really hard to share the good news. The more confident we are in Christ, the more bold we will be in our sharing the good news. And I want you to notice what Jesus' boldness does in this woman's life. Verse 29, I want to read it again. Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? What in the world is this woman doing? Do what? She's evangelizing, isn't she? And you think to yourself, whoa, wait a minute. This is a woman who just moments before, and actually we're going to read here in just a little bit, this was a really messed up woman. I mean, really. And she goes and she tells everybody in this town, come and see. Does that take a whole lot of confidence and boldness on her part? I didn't even have this here in my notes, but I was just like remembering something I was studying and a thought that occurred to me. This was a woman who it says early in here, Jesus calls her out. It says, bring your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. He goes, you're right, you don't have a husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the one that you're with now isn't even your husband. Ouch. That's kind of a way to get to the point there, Jesus. This is a woman who goes right back into the town, who probably every single woman in that town hates her, who she's probably slept with a number of guys in that town, and they're thinking to themselves, who's this woman coming back into town and telling us about this Messiah out by a well? It took an incredible amount of boldness and courage on this woman's part to go right back into that town. To everybody who probably hated her, probably everybody who had shoved her out of that town, to tell them the gospel of Jesus Christ. What this woman is essentially saying in verse 29 is, I want you to come and see a man who knows everything about me, who told me everything about myself, and he loved me anyways. And he wanted to be around me anyways. And he went out of his way to be with me anyways. You see, what Jesus' boldness does is Jesus' boldness motivates boldness in this woman. Putting himself out there led to a whole town being transformed through her testimony and her witness. Taking one small step will likely require boldness, guys. It will require all kinds of boldness and courage on our part. Even a courage to step outside of our normal boundaries, conventions, and our thoughts. But if we are convinced that what we have, the message that we have, the messenger who has sent us, is that great and that the world needs it, we'll take that risk every single time. The second thing that Jesus-style evangelism requires and takes is not just boldness, but it requires, and not really requires, but Jesus-style evangelism shows how Jesus is all satisfying. No other satisfaction could be found in anything else like it can be found in Jesus. What does he say here in verse 13 and 14? Anyone who drinks the water from this well will be thirsty again, but those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. What is he saying to this woman? I am all you need. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Guys, here is the fact of the matter in life. All of us are thirsty. All of us have something inside of us that can only be met, a longing that it can only be met in Jesus. Only Jesus can quench that thirst in our lives. Jesus points to the well. He reminds the woman that anyone who drinks that water is going to be thirsty in no time. But the living water that he offers will satisfy the thirst because it never stops. It never runs out. It never runs dry. It has an endless source. And you know what the sad truth is in our world today, most of the time? And maybe it's true for even some of us in this room this morning. Many of us, many people in the world would rather go through life filling our own water jar and just doing the same thing over and over again and getting no satisfaction from it. But we think that just one day it's going to happen and I'm going to be satisfied and it's going to fulfill me. Rather than turn to Jesus himself, the one who can truly satisfy. And the problem that we have is not a new one at all. In fact, an Old Testament prophet named Jeremiah talked about the same problem with God's people back then. Jeremiah 2:13 says this very simply. He says, "My people have done two evil things. They have done two things that are just completely wrong. They have abandoned me," and notice what he says here, "the fountain of living water." This isn't Jeremiah talking about himself. This is Jeremiah talking about God. My people have abandoned me, the fountain of living water, and they have dug for themselves cracked cisterns that can hold no water at all. What's he essentially saying? The very same thing Jesus is saying in John chapter 4. Every single day there are people who will come to the well and they will scoop out that water and there's a crack in their jar. And every day they'll carry that back to their town. They'll carry it back into their life. And by the time they get there, it's leaked out. And every single day they continue to die of thirst more and more and more. Guys, finding satisfaction and delight apart from Christ is kind of like drinking salt water when we're thirsty. You know what happens when you drink salt water when you're thirsty, right? It just makes you thirstier. It makes you thirstier and thirstier until the point when you just dehydrate and die. Guys, it seems to help. It seems to be like a great idea when there's a whole body of water around you, but it only ever leaves us wanting more. It leaves us more parched than we were before. The great author C.S. Lewis says it so well, says it way better than I ever said. When we pursue our satisfaction out of Christ, Lewis says it this way, we pursue an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. Every single thing that we think in life is going to give us that moment never, ever happens if it's found outside of Christ. Third thing this morning we notice in the story that I want to point out too is that faithful or Jesus-style evangelism is both relational, and this second one's going to surprise you, it's confrontational as well. So sometimes we kid ourselves that all you have to do is just be really friendly with people and that will just automatically make things happen. That's a great first step, guys, and that's a great thing to do. We have to have a relationship with people before we do this second part. But there's got to come a point in our relationship and in the life of that person when you say, guess what? I noticed something in your life that should not be there, that is causing all the source of your pain. And again, Jesus does this in a way that maybe we wouldn't do, maybe that we don't see as a great option, but he does it and it's very effective. Tells her again, go get your husband. She says, I don't have a husband. You're right. You've had 5. The one you're living with now, not your husband. Jesus enters this woman's life in a highly relational way at the very beginning of John 4, but he also does it, and he does it so that he can get to the point of what's causing brokenness in this woman's life. Now, there is a reason that it's probably not suggested to open up your relationship with somebody in this way. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't ever go there in our efforts to share the good news with people. And here's the reason why. And I know this is so tough for people to understand. They're like, well, I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to be confrontational. Guess what? I'm not a confrontational person at all. But do you know why it's so important that we finally get to the issue and we get right to the point with people after a certain amount of time? For anyone to understand how all-satisfying Jesus is and how good the news of Jesus' sacrifice is, they need to come to terms with how broken they are. Good news is not good news to people if they don't know what they're being rescued from. They need to understand how thirsty and how empty they are. We show that Jesus is all satisfied by shining a light on our attempts to find our happiness, to find our satisfaction anywhere else but Jesus. And how that search for those things is really just fruitless when compared to ultimate things, when compared to the ultimate one in Jesus Christ. When we offer people Jesus or anything else but Jesus, actually, we're doing them a disservice. We offer people Jesus, everything else should pale in comparison. When we present Jesus very clearly and very boldly to people, there is no such thing as a suitable alternative. It's almost, to me, I kind of thought this in my mind, it's almost like when you have Jesus, you have like the name brand versus the cheap knockoff. You have the authentic, real thing versus a cheap substitute. You have the real deal versus a pretender if you give anybody anything else but Jesus. Now, guess what? I'm a person that buying generic stuff at the store is not beneath me. I do a whole lot of it. But sometimes generic things are just not all that great. And I found a picture that almost really illustrates this perfectly. I want to put this picture up here and I want to see if you can read this. This is a tub of margarine. Do you see what it says? Wow, I totally thought it was butter. I'm not kidding you. I can see it right there on the corner. It says Great Value. That's a Walmart brand. I'm not saying go run out and you're going to find it here in our Walmart, but somewhere along the line, somebody thought that was a great idea to put a tub of margarine in there that was named, wow, I totally thought it was butter. Guys, this is what happens when we give people anything but Jesus. It just turns into something comical like that. There is no suitable alternative to the real thing. The last thing I want to point out to you this morning, not only does Jesus' style of evangelism require boldness, not only does it show that Jesus is all satisfying, and not only does it help us to be relational and confrontational, but this to me is the most important thing. Jesus' style evangelism culminates in the cross. Evangelism always points to the cross, where all the ugliness, all the brutality of sin was absorbed by the loveliness and the holiness of Jesus. Again, Jesus has this moment with her when he confronts her and she says, and she tries to deflect. Really awkward moment and situation. She tries to deflect and she says, well, guess what, Jesus? There are a lot of us who say that we actually worshiping God here on Mount Gerizim is where it needs to happen. And you Jews say it's actually there in Jerusalem where you worship. And Jesus says it and cuts through all of it and says, guess what? There is coming a time, and every time that he talks about time, it has to do with his death. So there's coming a time, and it's here, and it's very, very close, where it doesn't matter where you worship. It really matters who you worship. The only worship that really matters is that which is centered and focused on the one who voluntarily gave his life to be broken and shunned so that we could be made whole and accepted. I ran across a sermon this week in preparing for this sermon. And the sermon was titled The Fruit of Evangelism. And this man in this video was talking about this very concept of evangelism culminating in the cross, everything in evangelism pointing to the cross. I kind of cut the entire sermon down to about 1:30, and I want you to watch, I want you to listen to what this guy says, because he hits on something that I think a lot of us have probably overlooked before. Go ahead and show that video.
He says, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. The hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. Here. You see, when Jesus speaks of the hour here, the hour that is coming, when Jesus speaks of it in John, it's always a reference to his death. It's always a reference to the coming crucifixion. It's a reference to the moment when Jesus would be taken to a different mountain, when he would be taken outside of Jerusalem where criminals are persecuted. He's pointing to the moment where he would die on the cross. He's pointing to the moment where he would lay down his own life for her and for you and for me. Now I want you to think back with me for just a moment as Jesus is hanging there. You think about all the physical and emotional pain that Jesus experiences as he's laying down his life on the cross. And while he's up there, you remember he cries out and he asks for something, right? He says, I'm thirsty. Can I have something to drink? See, it wasn't just physical thirst that Jesus was experiencing. It was a deep spiritual thirst. Because in that moment, Jesus was taking the cup of God's wrath and he was drinking it. And he was drinking it all the way down to the dregs. He was fully satisfying the wrath of God towards you, towards me, and towards this woman. You see, here's what Jesus was doing. Jesus became thirsty for you on the cross so that you would never have to be thirsty again.
Like, we've never really thought of that before, have we? When Jesus hangs on the cross and he says to, I am thirsty. And we always think to ourselves, well, yeah, he's probably been on that cross forever. He's been beaten and tortured. Probably not had a drink in a long time. He's really, really physically thirsty. That's not what Jesus was really talking about. But as he went to that cross is exactly what he said. Jesus became thirsty so that you and so that I and so that every person in this world would never have to be thirsty again. Guys, what might God do if we would engage the people around us in a very personal way like he does with this woman here in Samaria, in Sychar? I want to make this message very personal. I don't want it to be in theory like, oh, it's good what Jesus did. I want to give you 3 ways that we can engage in evangelism right here, right now, today. And the first one is this, and I think it's the first necessary step, is that we need to put away all distractions and all obstacles in our life. You know, Jesus didn't have to go through Sychar. He didn't have to go through Samaria. He could have made every excuse as to why he needed to go another way. The woman could have kept clutching at her water jar. See, that's the thing in this story. It's not just about Jesus. There's 2 models of and 2 examples of evangelism in the story. The woman is one of those. The woman could have kept clutching her water jar, and she could have kept finding her security and her satisfaction in every other thing, which she had obviously tried numerous times in her life. But both of them, Jesus and this woman, made the move. They took the risk. They put away anything and everything that could and would stand in the way of the gospel being shared. Put away all distractions. Put away all obstacles. And the second way that we can engage is this. Give the invitation. Sometimes it's just as simple as that. If we just give the invitation to people. This one is so straightforward, but it's so very hard to apply. Again, this verse or this phrase in verse 29 is so key. She says again, what is she doing? She says, come and see. What is she doing in that moment? Inviting people to something greater in Jesus Christ. She gives the invitation. That line, come and see, is a popular line in the Gospel of John. It's one that Jesus uses to call people to himself and invite them to something deeper. Put away distractions and obstacles. Give the invitation. And the third one is this. Continue speaking life into people. There's a section of this story that I haven't read yet that I want to read because what she does going into this town and then streaming back out is not the end of the story. Verse 39 of John 4, it says, many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, he told me everything I ever did. When they came out to see him, they begged him to stay in their village, and so Jesus stayed for 2 days, long enough for many more to hear his message and believe. And then they said to the woman, now we believe, not just because of what you have said to us or what you have told us, but because we have heard him for ourselves. Now we know that he is indeed the Savior of the world. Guys, is this not a fascinating story from beginning to end? In just short amount of time, Jesus has not just transformed this woman, he has transformed an entire town. This woman has had a part that she played in transforming an entire town to the point that they come and say, Jesus is, this guy out by the well is the Savior of the world. Not a good man, not a rabbi. Guys, don't be simply satisfied with giving an invitation. Stick around in people's lives and continue to speak truth and life into them. Guys, people are not pawns that we use in our game to get more converts. People are precious to God and they should be precious to us. So rather than popping in and popping out, what would happen if we just stuck around for a while and we loved on people? Not for the notch that they would give us on our evangelism belt, but because they, just like we, were worth Jesus dying for. So most certainly, they're worth the time that we invest in their lives. It's eternally worth it. Side note here, if people are not going to come to you, guess what you're going to have to do? Many times anymore, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go to them. Jesus does it. They invite Jesus into this village, and he says, all right, I'll stay for 2 days. And as a result, it says, many more people believed and came to Jesus Christ. I want to read one more scripture this morning and kind of start to wind down with this. John chapter 15, Jesus talks about himself being the true vine. And he says, I am the true grapevine. My Father is a gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so they will produce even more. You've already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. The message is pretty clear there. He says it many times. You want to bear fruit in your life as a disciple and a follower of Jesus? Stay connected to him. This Samaritan woman, the least likely person you would ever expect, she is the person who was really the most fruitful in this whole story. The disciples weren't. The disciples were sent back into town. They could have had the opportunity to spread the good news, and they don't. It's this Samaritan woman that does it. She bore fruit. What does it say again in verse 39? Many Samaritans came to a belief because of this woman said. She not only bore fruit, she bore much fruit. It says in verse 41, Jesus stayed long enough for many others to hear the message and to believe. And this woman, even today, bears much fruit. Here's the thing that I noticed, and this is interesting about this story. Nobody knows how many people have been brought to Christ because of the witness of this one woman. Here's the thing that's really crazy to me. This is still going on, guys. Because of one woman going back into a town and telling people, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. And it's still continuing on today. People are still coming to Christ because of that woman's testimony thousands of years ago. What could happen if we made a move just like her? Guys, the results would be far-reaching and all the way into eternity. I want to read a story this morning in closing, and I thought it was a particularly great one and one that illustrated very well what we've talked about this morning. So there's a story, an old story, about a harbor town that was located in a very treacherous area where boats frequently capsized on the rocks in bad weather. The town was known for its faithful rescue team. Whenever the bell sounded, a group of men rowed quickly to the scene of the disaster, risking their lives to remove sailors from sinking vessels or to pluck them from the heaving waves. And after a few years, the town collected money to build a rescue station right near the shore to store all of their equipment, thus making their rescue work easier. And also, special training was offered to others who wanted to become rescuers. The operation became very efficient, saving hundreds of lives from the raging waters. But as time went by, comforts and conveniences were added to the building. Cupboards full of food, a dining room, a lounge with stuffed chairs and recliners, and sleeping quarters. The lovely building became a club where townspeople loved to eat, meet, play games, and socialize. The bell still sounded when a wreck occurred, but only a handful of people responded. Later, no one even bothered to answer the rescue call, for they didn't want to leave the comfortable club. You know what happens so often when we come into a church and we gather as a body of believers is that we just sit down on this pew and think, oh, man, this pew is actually really comfortable. And the longer that we sit here in this pew, I'm convinced that for some of us, we come further and further away from the mission of Jesus Christ and what he's called us to do. So my encouragement this morning is that we would not become too comfortable. We would not become too, if you will, fattened by the great things that the church can be, and that we would realize and we would recognize our mission every single day, every single time that we come together, and that is to share a message of good news and a message of hope that we have for all mankind, that we have for all people. Lord, that's my prayer this morning, that for all of us, we would see the great task that lays before us, and it is an intimidating one.